to Inyana Diyoma. So today we will be discussing a sugya dealing with Tkias Shofar, the central and most important mitzvah of Rosh Hashanah. Next week, too far ahead. I don't plan that far ahead. So next week, either Rosh Hashanah or Slichas or Yom Kippur, a relevant sugya dealing with the Yomim Neiroim. So today, the question we will be discussing, what is the basic definition of... so today's shir is dedicated. Leilui Nishmas. Rav Avrom Yankov ben Reb Shraga Favel Doffel. Tonight is the Yortzeit. And Shienuach B'Sholom HaMishkavoi. And he should be a Meres Yoshev for the entire wonderful family. And the shir is dedicated by his brother, who is a Mishtatev Kavua, a participant in this shir. When he is in Eretz Yisrael, he usually comes to the shir. So the title we learned tonight is Leilui Nishmas HaRav Reb Avrom Yankov ben Reb Shraga Favel. It should be a Meretz Yoshev for the entire family, and they should only know Simcha and Naches. So as I said, the topic we will be discussing tonight is what is the basic Haggadah, the basic definition of Mitzvah HaShofar? Because all the Torah says is Yom Teruah Yiyeh Luchem. What does that mean? Is it Tkias Shofar or Shmiyas Koil Shofar? Is the mitzvah blowing the shofar, or rather hearing? I don't think hearing is the right definition. Listening. You need to listen and hear the shofar. Seems to be a machlokes rishonim. It would be useful if I could have a Rambam's manim. Yes, the Rambam is right there. So the Rambam in 7 different sources seems to make it very clear that the mitzvah is Tkias Shofar. Perek Aleph Aloch Aleph. Perek Beis Aloch Aleph, Perek Aleph Aloch Gimel, Protei HaMitzvah, Sefer HaMitzvah, Ha'orech V'Hakotza Kufayin, Shuvas Peirah Dorsim and Nun Aleph. These are the sources in which we learn in the Rambam the mitzvah is not blowing the shofar, but rather Lishmoya Koil Shofar. So I quoted so many sources in the Rambam, so at least let's be specific about some of them. Protei HaMitzvah, at the very beginning of Hilchas Shofar, Lishmoya Koil Shofar be'echod b'tishrei, and then Perek Aleph Aloch Aleph, Mitzvah Saseh Shel Torah, Lishmoya Truas HaShofar be'Rosh Hashanah. Perek Aleph Aloch Gimel, the Rambam writes, if a person steals a shofar hagazel, and he blows, would that be defined as a mitzvah b'avayra? The Rambam says no. She'eina mitzvah elo b'shmiyas hakoil, ve'ein b'koil din gezela. So the Rambam makes it very clear in various different sources. As I said, 7 different sources. The mitzvah is lishmoya kol shofar. Sefer HaChinuch, as usual, Tov Hei, follows in the footsteps of the Rambam. The Torah in Siman Tov Kuf Pei says, because the mitzvah is shmiyah, that also is reflected in Nusach HaBrocha. We say, Asher Kedushono b'mitzvah v'tzivono lishmoya koil shofar. Rabbeinu Tam seems to differ, because the Rosh in Perek Daled the Masechet Rosh Hashanah brings in the name of Rabbeinu Tam that the brocha is Al Tkias Shofar. And many Rishonim quote that as the shitta of Rabbeinu Tam. And we find 2 different formulas in Rabbeinu Tam's shitta. Some bring that according to Rabbeinu Tam, the Nusach HaBrocha is Al Tkias Shofar. Others bring that the Nusach HaBrocha is Litkoa B'Shofar. But according to both formulas, we mention Tkiya and not Shmiyah. And obviously, Rabbeinu Tam has a shutaf, and that is the she'iltas. And she'iltas that Rav Achai go in She'ilta Kufa and Aleph, the she'ilta says that the mitzvah is Litkoya B'Shofar, and the brocha is Al Tekiyas Shofar. Did I ever tell you the story about the she'iltas? First of all, who was the she'iltas? The Rashbam and Tosfos in Zvochem, and also in the very beginning of Masechet Bava Basra. According to the Rashbam, she'iltas that Rav Achai Goen was put together by Rav Achai that is found in Shas, one of the latest Ameroim. And according to the Rashbam, it has tremendous significance, the Shiltas, because it actually is part of essential Torah Sheval Peh, part of Divrei Chazal. Tosfos argues, no, he was one of the Gaonim in a later generation. But the Meiri, in his introduction to a Sefer, writes a fascinating story. How did the Shiltas come to be? So the Meiri says that Rav Chai Gaon had a son who wasn't a great masmid. He didn't like to learn. And his father had tremendous agmas nefesh. His son was running all around the place, and he really didn't get him to sit and learn and properly toil in Torah. So he composed a short compilation of all the mitzvahs, and he was mesada them according to the Parshas HaShavua, because Shabbos, the boy wasn't sure. What could you do on Shabbos? So Shabbos he sit and learned with his father. So Rav Chai Gaon put together most of the sugyas in Shas, and most of the mitzvahs in the Torah, in accordance to the weekly parshas. So Shabbos he had the opportunity to learn together with his son and teach him. And that is how the Shiltas came to be. And one comes to wonder, how is it that the Gadol Hador, one of the greatest Gedolim and greatest Goyim in days of yore, had a son that didn't want to learn? So who knows? Maybe it was Min HaShamayim. We should be zeicher to the Shiltas, which is one of the most fundamental svorim b'divrei harashonim. So the Shiltas and Rabbeinu Tam maintain that the mitzvah is tkiya shofar, while the Rambam and the Tur maintain that the mitzvah is lishmoa kol shofar, and that is why we find two different gerses, two different opinions, two different formulas in Nusach HaBrocha. Do we say that tkoya b'shofar, or rather lishmoya kol shofar? And it's quite interesting to note that many of the Achronim argue that the mitzvah is a combination of both Tkiya and Shemiyah. Do we find similar phenomena regarding other mitzvahs? Of course we do. Many. And some mitzvahs are a combination of different acts and deeds, not only one ma'aseh. Let's take as an example a klovas HaKarbonos. So there's a mitzvah klovas HaChatos, another one a klovas HaOila, klovas HaShlomim, and the Toidah, and each korban is a mitzvah. But each of these korbanos, the mitzvah, necessitates various different acts. Shchita, Kabbalah, Hoilochas Adam, Zrikas Adam, Aktoras U'Eimerim. So, to be mekayim each of these mitzvahs of a klovas HaKarbonos, minimum ma'asim, you need to do 5 different acts, which is Shchita, Kabbalah, Hoilochas, Zrika, and Aktoras U'Eimerim. The Rambam maintains that the mitzvahs of Trumas and Maisis are a combination of 2 ma'asim, and it's one mitzvah. Hafroshas Truma v'nesina l'kohen, Hafroshas ha'maisa v'nesina l'levi, Hafroshas ha'maisa v'nesina la'ani, if it's maser ani. So yes, we find many mitzvahs which necessitate doing more than one act. So it should be no wonder if the Achronim argue that mitzvahs shofar is a combination of tkiya and shmiyah. The problem with this opinion is it doesn't fit in with the Rishonim. Because the Rambam writes, Ein ha-mitzvah elo b'shmiyas hakoil. And that's why there is no din of mitzvah bo b'avera. If the mitzvah would be a combination, then you need to blow the shofar, then that would be a mitzvah bo b'avera. So the Rishonim seem clearly to state, it's either or, either shmiyah or tekiah. But the Yom Teruah, Maram ben Chaviv, going back 400 years, in his Sefer Yom Teruah, Masechet Rosh Hashanah, Daf Chav Zayin, that's his opinion. Following in his footsteps is the Minchas Chinuch. And the Minchas Chinuch has a very interesting question. So if the mitzvah is Tkiya and Shemiyah, do we need Tkiya and Shemiyah together, or we could separate one from the other? What is the Metzias? What is he dealing with? So at this stage, we need to deal with the sugyas. Why do the Achronim come up with a new idea? That mitzvah's shofar necessitates tkiya and shmiyah gam yachad. Because there are 4 sugyas in Masechet Rosh Hashanah which seem to contradict each other. 2 sugyas which prove that the mitzvah is shmiyah, 2 others which would seem to prove that the mitzvah is tkiya. And how do we reconcile these sugyas? So let's just embark on a short discussion, 1, 2, 3, 4, and dealing with these 4 sugyas. Rosh Hashanah Daf Chav Zayin, HaTorkei L'Toich HaBoyer Lo Yotze Yedei Chayvos. If a person blows the shofar into a pit or a cave, he isn't Yotze. And the Gemara explains, It depends where the people are, the ones that want to be yoitza. If they are in the cave, they are yoitza. But if they're standing outside the cave, they're not yoitza. And the Gemara explains, because if a person blows the shofar into a cave and people are standing outside the cave, then what they hear is a koil havora. What does koil havora mean? Probably an echo. And that is not the original voice of the shofar, therefore one is not yoitza. We won't have time tonight to discuss. So, Rabbi Yosef Engel in Brochus Chofei writes, there's a new invention that has come up, and people call it the telephone. Could one be yoitza tkiya shofar through a telephone? And he deals what we hear. Is that a kol havora? Is it similar to an echo? And obviously, Rabbi Yosef Engel wasn't very familiar with the technology, and he thought that it is somewhat of an echo, which naturally is not right. It's just a totally reproduction of a voice which is similar to the one that the person produced. But in no way do you hear that person's voice, neither directly or indirectly. So I don't want to go into the halachic question of hearing shofar from hearing aid, cochlear implant, or a microphone. These are sugyas discussed at great length, but I don't think we will have time to go into the details today. So the Gemara says, if you're in the cave, then you're yoitz. If you're outside the cave, you're not. And even the Baal Tekiah himself, if he's outside, and the voice comes out of the shofar inside the cave, then he isn't yoitz. So obviously he's using a Taimani shofar, because if you have an Ashkenazi shofar, it's very hard to imagine how could he be standing outside the cave and the koil shofar is inside the cave, but the Taimanim have a long spiral shofar. It always was a wonder to me, because Chazal say, Omer HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Tikal Afora B'Shofar Shel Ayel V'Yizkor Lachem Eloi Shel Yitzchak Ben Avram. So it is preferable to use the shofar of a ram, and the Taimanim use the shofar of an African antelope called the kudu. I don't know whether people are familiar with animals here, but it has very long and spiraled horns, beautiful horns, but it isn't a ayel. So, but that is their meaning. So obviously this person is standing outside the cave, he has a long shofar, and the koil shofar goes out of the pia shofar that is in the cave. But what is important to our discussion, even the tekiah is not yoitza. And the question is, according to the Rabbeinu Tam, that the mitzvah is tekiah, why isn't he yoitza? Other people can be yoitza because they aren't tekiah. So the only way they could be yoitza is shomea ka'oina. So they need to hear a proper kol shofar. But the tekiah himself, why isn't he yoitza? He blew the shofar. He produced a proper kol shofar because the people standing in the cave were yoitza. So why ain't he yoitza if the mitzvah is kiyah? So if the mitzvah is shmiyah, there's no difference between the Baal Tekiah or any other person. The essential mitzvah is lishmoya kol shofar. So the fact that you're blowing the shofar means nothing. You, just as anyone else, have the mitzvah of lishmoya kol shofar, and what you're hearing is an echo, and it's not the original kol shofar. But according to Rabbeinu Tam and the shiltas of the mitzvah tkiyah, why wouldn't he be yoitza? On the other hand, the Avchav Tes, we learn in the Mishnah, Ashomeya mepi cheresh shoita v'kotten lo yotze dechavosai. Ze haklal. Kol ha-mechuyev b'dover moitzei chenim v'dechavosai. Mi she'eino mechuyev b'dover eino moitzei chenim v'dechavosai. If the mitzvah is tkiyah, then we very well understand the Mishnah. Because the tekiah is the moitzi others, yedei chayvosan, so he needs to be a bar chayuva. But if the mitzvah is shmiyah, then the tekiah isn't moitzi anyone. Each and every member of the congregation is makayim the mitzvah on his own, b'shmias koil shofar. So why can't they hear from a cheresh shoita v'kotten? He doesn't have to be moitzi them, because each and every one of those people hearing the kol shofar is makayim the mitzvah on his own. So this sugya, this is a Mishnah, seems to prove that the mitzvah is tekiah, and that is why the Baal Tekiah, if he's not a bar chiyuv, can be moitzi others. But the sugya of tekiah as toichabor seems to prove that the mitzvah is shmiyah, and that's why the Baal Tekiah himself is not yoitza if he doesn't hear a proper kol shofar. And that is why many achronim maintain we must assume that the mitzvah is a combination of both. But as I said before, we find no one of the Rishonim that this opinion would fit in to their text. The Rambam clearly says, and the Torah as well, Eina mitzvah elo b'shmiyas hakoil. And when we learn the She'iltas in Kufayin Aleph, he says the mitzvah is Tkiya, and that is why we say Litkoya b'shoifa. That is the Nusach HaBrocha. So let me try to be miyashav both sugyas, Ali b'damar and Ali b'damar. Shalat Shuvas Maram al-Shakar was one of the later Rishonim, and a Simon Yud in his Sefer. He speaks about Shitas Rabbeinu Tam, that the mitzvah is Tkiya. And he makes an interesting point. In Brochas Tezvav Amud Aleph, there's a machlokes in the Mishnah regarding mitzvahs Kriyas Shema. Machlokes Chachamim and Rabbi Yossi. Is it enough lahoitzi b'sfosav, or maybe tzorach lahashmiya la'oznav? Rabbi Yossi maintains tzorach lahashmiya la'oznav. And if he says very low, and he can't even hear what he's saying, lo yotzi dechavosai. Why? Because the pasuk says Shema Hashmiya la'aznacho. Chachamim say no. Shema means b'kol loshen shatu shomeya. Could we define mitzvahs Kriyas Shema as Shemiya? No, definitely not. Because the basic source of mitzvahs Kriyas Shema is the pasuk v'dibartu bam. So the pasuk clearly says the mitzvah is dibur. After Piken, there is a condition, a stipulation. The mitzvah is dibur, but on the condition that you hear what you say. So there could be a similar condition regarding Tekiyah Shofar. And even if the mitzvah would be Tekiyah, maybe Tzorach Lashmiya La'aznav. But that is not the essence of the mitzvah. It's not the basic definition of the mitzvah, but rather a condition, a stipulation, one of the tanoim of the mitzvah. So Rabbeinu Tam would maintain the mitzvah is Tekiyah, and therefore the brocha is Litkoya b'shofar. But on the condition that you also hear your Tekiyah. So that is the addition of the Maram al-Shakar. So according to Rabbeinu Tam, you would have no problem with the sugya of Tekiah Torchabor. Even the Tekiah needs to hear. That doesn't mean the mitzvah is Shmiyah. But it could be a din, just like we find by Kriyas Shema Shittas Rabbi Yossi. On the other hand, how would the Rambam explain why do we need to hear from a bar chiyuva? So the Chazon Ish in Siman Yutes and Achaim says, even in the mitzvah Shmiyah, but you need to hear a kol shofar shel mitzvah. And if a person blows and he's not a bar chiyuva, that's not a koil shofar shel mitzvah. There's a din of the cheftza of the koil. You need to hear a koil shofar shel mitzvah. And if he's not a bar chiyuva, that is not a koil shofar shel mitzvah. It is as if we reproduce the kol shofar. No. When you reproduce the kol shofar by electronics, it's not a kol shofar. But if a cheresh shoita v'kotten blows, it's a kol shofar. So would a person be yotzeh if an ape was trained to blow the shofar? It's a kol shofar, but it's not a human kol shofar. So I think everybody would understand, no, that doesn't seem right. You know, you have a monkey blowing the shofar, you can't be yotzeh. The kol shofar would sound the same. And unlike an electronically transmitted kol shofar, it is a kol shofar. So obviously, there is room to argue. You can't be yoitza with any shofar. It needs to be a koil shofar shel mitzvah. And I don't think it should be a pella, because we find a similar fundamental idea in many mitzvahs, that the chefetz of the mitzvah has to be produced lishma. For instance, tzitzis. Making the tzitzis, tiring the tzitzis is not the mitzvah. It's only the preparation of the chefetz. And after pekan there's a din. We find a similar din by matzah's mitzvah and by tzitzis. And according to one opinion in Avodah Zarah of Zayin, by milah. So we find that sometimes even the chefetz has to be produced with a special kavod on Hashem mitzvah. So why wouldn't we say in the same regard with tkiya shofar? The mitzvah is l'shmaya kol shofar, but it can be just any kol shofar. If an animal blows the shofar, that's not the kol shofar that you need to hear. It must be produced not only by a human being, not only by a ben yisrael, by a bar chiyuv, and you need to hear a kol shofar shel mitzvah. So that would reconcile both sugyas and leave the Rambam up to himself and Rabbeinu Tam up to himself, and don't try to tie them together. They don't want to be together in this halacha. But there are two additional sugyas which are a bit more complicated to reconcile. Two more sugyas. And both are in Rosh Hashanah Chavtes. So 3 out of the 4 sources are on the same block. The Gemara says, not only do you need to hear from a bar chiyuva, we also need kavonas shomeya the kavonas mashmiya. A person cannot be yoitza by listening to the kol shofar only if he has kavona, and the one blowing the shofar has kavona to be moitzi others yedei choyvoson. And we ask the same fundamental question, but he's not moitzi acherim yedei choyvoson. So why does it need to be a machamet yedei choyvoson? Why wouldn't it be enough that he's a bar chiyuva? So the kol shofar is a kol shofar shel mitzvah. Why does he need to be moitzi others when in reality he is not moitzi others? Because the mitzvah is lishmoa kol shofar and not letkoya shofar. So we asked, so why do we need to hear from a bar chiyuva? Okay, so we gave a logical explanation. If that kol shofar is not produced by a bar chiyuva, it's not a kol shofar shel mitzvah. But why do we need kavona of the tkiat to be moitzi others when actually he's not moitzi others? So the Chazon Ish gives us a somewhat complicated formula, which I have difficulty agreeing with, and he says, it needs to be a kol shofar shel mitzvah legabe ha-shomeya. And if the tkiat isn't machav and loitzi ha-shomeya, it might be a kol shofar shel mitzvah legabe tkiat, but not legabe ha-shomeya. No, I think that is taking the svara to an extreme. He hears a kol shofar shel mitzvah. So why do we need kavana to be moitzi the shomeya when, by basic definitions, he's not moitzi the shomeya? When a person wants to be moitzi others with bersa Torah, bersa moza, and tefillah, and kriya shema, yes, all these mitzvahs are dibur. So the one that davens or reads kriya shema, recites kriya shema, has to be moitzi others. But if the mitzvah of shofar is l'shmoya kol shofar, and the kol shofar is a proper kol shofar of a bar chiyuva, why do we need kavonas mashmiya? On the other hand, in that same blot, there's a fascinating halacha. Misha chetzio eved chetzio ben choyren, there's a machlokes, could it be moitzi others? And the halacha is, einoi moitzi acherim dechavosan, deloi oset tzad avdos, v'moitzi tzad cheres, he cannot be even yoitze himself. Everybody agrees he can't be moitzi others. But the machlokes is, could he be moitzi himself? Could he blow shofar for himself? And the Gemara says no. Lo yoset tzad avdos, v'mapik tzad cheres. And that is why he needs to hear the shofar from a person that is a total bar chiyuva, not a chotzi eved chotzi ben choyren. Because an eved is chayav b'mitzvahs ki'isho. And no shema porter from tkiya shofar. Yesterday, I was asked the shaila, and I was really shocked. Really shocked. So a person asked me, he davens in a shul, and their Baltekeya blows in another shul, so he only gets there for Musaf. for the Oiches Manesla. And they don't have a Baltekeya for Tkiyas de Meyushav. So there's a lady in the Ezes Noshim that blows the shofar. She doesn't come down to the men's section. She blows from the Ezes Noshim, and she blows beautiful Tkiyas. And a lady blows in the Ezes Noshim the Tkiyas de Meyushav, and then the Baltekeya arrives to the Oiches Manesla from another shul, and he blows the Tkiyas de Muhammad. So he asked me whether he should go to another shul. I said, definitely yes, for two reasons. Not only one, for two reasons. Reason number one, after all, Tkiyas de Meyushav is a chiyuv. Minatori, yoytzu et shloishim koilos, but it's a Gemara Shonah Tev Zayin that you have Tkiyas de Meyushav and Tkiyas de Muhammad. And a woman cannot be moitzi others because the simple reason she's not a bar chiyuv. And the Mishnah says, so the Tkiyas de Meyushav you're hearing from the Ezes Noshim is me nothing. You can't be yoitzi with those Tkiyas. Chutz mezeh, it's an Orthodox shul. It's very strange to me that in an Orthodox shul we would have a lady in the Ezes Noshim blowing shofar for the men sitting downstairs without a Bal Makra. I mean, the halacha necessitates there should be a Bal Makra as well. So, very strange. We live in a strange world, an Orthodox shul. So la halacha, the Rambam, and the Shulchan Aruch Paskin, Chotz Yevet Chotz Mechorin can't blow even for himself because he's a combination of Chiyuv and Ptor, of Avdus and Cherus. Just like an Eved is Poter Meshoifer, so he can be Moitzi another person, so Tzad Avdus can be Moitzi Tzad Cherus. So I have a very fundamental question. Why do we find this halacha only once in Shas and once in Rambam and Shulchan Aruch? The same question would arise in many different mitzvahs. So do you remember any mitzvahs shebediva which nosham are poter and anosham are chayiv, and eved is poter and a ben choyer is chayiv? How many do you remember? Mitzvahs shebediva shenoshim pturot mehem. Kriyas Shema. Mitzvahs say shazman groma. Everybody agrees not. So what does a chotz yevet chotz ben choyer do with Krishma? Hilchas Krishma and Shulchan Aruch are far before Hilchas Shofar. So why don't we find in Hilchas Kriyas Shema, Chotz Yevet Chotz Ben Choyer needs to be yoitze from a cherem. He can't do it himself. What else? Anoshim Chayiv and Berachas Hamazon. It's a boye de lo ifshita in Berachas Davchof. La Halacha Uch Machmir that a issue can't be moitzeyesh. Why wouldn't a lady be Chayiv and Berachas Hamazon? It's not Zman Groma. Machlokes Rashi and Tosfos. Rashi says because they didn't have a chelik b'chalukas haaretz, so you can't say al eretz chemdu toiva according to Tosfos bris and Torah. But it's a bayed the lo yifshit and we're machmes. So what does a chotz yevet chotz ben choyin do with berachas hamazon? Why don't we learn there that he needs to hear from another person who is kuloi chiyuv? How about Sfiras Uoimar? Tov Pei Tes. It's not a Gemara, but the Magen Avraham says it's a mitzvah say shazman grom and noshim ptura. So what does a chotz yevet chotz mechayim do with Sfiras Uoimar? So there are many mitzvahs in which we have the same dilemma, but neither in Gemara, nor in Brisa, nor Rambam, nor Shulchan Aruch, none of the poskim till the Minchas Chinuch. The Minchas Chinuch is very fond of the sugya chotz yevet chotz mechayim. Almost in every mitzvah. So the Minchas Chinuch in many mitzvahs, berachas hamazon, Sfiras Uoimar, Kriyas Shema says chotz yevet chotz mechayim tzorach l'shmoyim api achayim. I don't think so. If that would be the case, it's a gevaldige kasha. So why don't Chazal anywhere in Shas deal with this question regarding these other mitzvahs? It's not only Chazal, none of the poskim up to the Minchas Chinuch. So what is the explanation? So whenever I ask this question, I answer with a mashal. It's an amusing mashal. Try not to laugh. So people come the first day in Sukkot into the Sukkah. And by human nature, as we know, everybody walks in with his dalat minim, and each of them looks at the others, people saw the reslegim one to another. So a person who seems to be another mechubed comes into shul with a very strange lulav, 16 centimeters, 2 tefachim. Beautiful essig and a very little lulav. His friend tells him, I don't want to embarrass you, but put it away before anybody sees it because you're going to have big bizyainis. Shir lulav is dalet tefachim, and your lulav is approximately half of that shir. He says, my dear friend, you're insulting me. I know halacha, but I'm a chotziyevet chotze ben chayrin. So if you need 4 tefachim, I only need 2 because I only have a half a chiyuv. I asked you not to laugh, but you can't stand the temptation. Yes, it is amusing, and I said so in advance, but why isn't he right? He only has a half a chiyuv. So why can't he get away with 2 tefachim? A man that is kol kuloi bar chiyuv, his shoe is 4 tefachim. So Chotzi Eved Mechor sits in sukkah. Would the tfanas of his sukkah be enough 5 tefachim, not a solid tefachim? And when he eats matzah, okay, matzah is not the right example. Kol sheyeshno bebal toichel chumetz yeshno bekum achol matzah, but sukkah. Noshim p'tura min sukkah. So the first night sukkah. Everybody needs to eat a kazayas. Could he get away with a chotzi zayas? No. Because the chefz of the mitzvah needs to be a proper one. Your chiyuv is half. But your mitzvah needs to be a kosher mitzvah. You need to eat a kazayas in the sukkah. You need to have a proper sukkah. And the shir mechitzas is a sorat tefachim. Your lulav needs to be a kosher lulav. So the shir lulav is dalet tefachim. So the chefza needs to be a proper chefza. Even though the kiyum is always a limited kiyum. Kichiyuvoi kach kiyumoi. And therefore, Chotzi Eved Chayrin recites his own krishma. He says his own berachas hamazon. He counts his own sfiras uoima, just like he's chayiv in lulav, even though he's half chiyuv and half ptor. So how would you expect him to be mekayim? It's his lulav. By lulav, nobody could be moitzi him. So what does he do with lulav? What does he do with sukkah? When he sits in the sukkah, it's tzad chelus and tzad avdus are confused, but kichiyuvoi kach kiyumoi. He doesn't need to offer a Kodesh Baruch Hu more than a Kodesh Baruch Hu gave him. So he is a Chotzi Eved Chotze Mechayrin. And that is the way he performs his mitzvahs. Kichiyuvoi kach kiyumoi. But the chefza needs to be a proper chefza. And that is the difference between Tkiya Shofar and all the other mitzvahs Shabbat. Because regarding all the other mitzvahs Shabbat, the mitzvah is dibur. So that's the maximum he could give. That's the maximum HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants him to give. He has half a chiyuv, half a kiyum. But regarding shofar, the koil shofar is the chefz of the mitzvah. It's not the performance of the mitzvah. He's mechuyev lishmoya. And he needs to hear a koil shofar shal mitzvah. There's a koil shofar that he needs to hear, needs to be a koil shofar shal kuloi mitzvah. Just like his lulav needs to be a proper lulav. And he needs a kazayas and not a half a kazayas. And his tzitzis need to be tzitzis that are lishma and not half lishma. So it is only shofar that stands apart, because the mitzvah shofar is lishma kol shofar. If the mitzvah would be tkiya, the shofar would be no different than krishma, berachas hamazon, sfiras uomer, lulav or sukkah. So the difference between shofar and all the others, and the reason we don't find this halacha only by shofar, is because shofar is different. Because the koil shofar is the chefza. It's not the mitzvah. This mitzvah is lishmoya koil shofar. Maybe I will give the same svara but with mathematics, with numbers, because many people understand numbers better than they understand words and concepts. So let's put it like this. Chotzi Eved Chotze Ben Chayrin, his mitzvahs need to be 50%. And therefore, when he's noit lulav, 50% chiyuv, 50% kiyum. The same regarding Krishma and Berchas Hamazon and Svias Avoimer and Yeshiva B'Sukkah. But regarding shofar, if he blows his own shofar, then when he blows the shofar, it's only 50% of chiyuv. And when he hears, it's only 50. He's left with 25%, and that is not enough. Because he blows the shofar, and then he hears the shofar. So 50% he loses when he blows the shofar. And when he hears, one ear is avdus, ptur. Only one ear is chiyuv. So another 25% drop off the line, and he's left with 25%, and that is not enough. So it's the same svara. The koil shofar is the chefza. It's not the actual mitzvah. The mitzvah is lishmoa. So the koil shofar that he hears must be a proper koil shofar shekula chiyuv. Just like his lulav needs to have a shir lulav, and a sukkah needs to have a shir sukkah, and all the other mitzvahs are the same. So this sugya seems to prove that the mitzvah is lishma kol shofar, and therefore chotzi avet chotzav and chorin can blow for himself. So how would Rabbeinu Tam understand this sugya? And therefore, I want to say a new mahalach, different than the Yom Teruah and the Minchas Chinuch. No, it's not a combination. Because the Rambam and the Rabbeinu Tam don't seem to feel so. But I want to be a mechadash a new Haggadah, and I didn't see anyone before me to say the same. Many mitzvahs, and these are concepts you heard from me many times, because many times we come back again and again to the basic Haggadahs of mitzvahs. And I explained that sometimes there is the Mahusa mitzvah and Maisa mitzvah. I think a few weeks ago, I don't recall when, we spoke about mitzvahs Talmud Torah, right? And I quoted the Shulchan Aruch HaRav that says there are two mitzvahs, Yediyas Torah and Talmud Torah. And I said no. Yediyas Torah is not a mitzvah in its own. In mitzvahs Talmud Torah, there's Maisa mitzvah and Mahusa mitzvah. The Mahus, the essence of the mitzvah is Yediyas Torah. The reason we need to learn to know, and we need to know to perform. How would one be Mekayim mitzvahs without knowing what those mitzvahs are? And how would one know without learning? So mitzvahs Talmud Torah is Talmud Torah, Kishmo Kein Hu. The mitzvah is to learn. But the objective and the goal and the essence and the reasoning and the logic of this mitzvah is you need to learn because you need to know. And you need to know because you need to observe. So many times we differentiate between the essence of the mitzvah and the actual act or deed. And I think the mahus of mitzvah shofar is shmiyah, but tkiya is defined as a ma'isa mitzvah. And not only as a hechsher mitzvah. It's not like tying your tzitzis or building a sukkah. Tkiya is defined as a ma'isa mitzvah. Afar pisha mahusa mitzvah, the inyona is shmiyah. And why is that? Because tkiya and shmiyah are intertwined, and they are inseparable. You can't blow today and hear tomorrow. And hearing is passive. It's not active. Ze savil velo pa'il. And therefore, ein shmiyah below tkiya. It is as if, let's try to imagine that the Torah would say, Titku'u kidei shetishma'u. Or, I would suggest a different formula. Tishma'u kol tkiyatchem. So tkiya is not merely hechsher mitzvah. Hechsher mitzvah is something I could do today and perform the mitzvah tomorrow. Building a sukkah is hechsher mitzvah. Sitting in the sukkah is the mitzvah. Tying your tzitzis is hechsher mitzvah. Wearing those tzitzis is the mitzvah. So tying your tzitzis and building your sukkah is hechsher. But you can't blow the shofar today and hear it tomorrow. And Shmiya's kol shofar is not a ma'isa. It is a toitzoah. And therefore, the relationship between Tkiya and Shmiya is not a relationship between Hechsher mitzvah and Kiyum mitzvah. It is the relationship between Maisa mitzvah and Mahusa mitzvah. And therefore, yes, the essence of the mitzvah is Shmiya. But each and every one also needs Tkiya. And that is why the Baal Tekiah needs to blow for or the others. It is as if each and every one has the mitzvah, Titka'u kedei shetishma'u. Tkiya shofar is the Maisa mitzvah. Even though Shmiya's Kol shofar is the Mahusa mitzvah. And that reconciles all the sugyas. The Rambam is right. Ein ha-mitzvah b'shmiyas hakol ve'ein b'shmol din gezel. There is no mitzvah b'uba aveira, because the ikar mitzvah and the Mahusa mitzvah is the Shmiya. But we still need the Tkiya as well. And that is why we need a bar chiyuva, and we need kavonas mashmiyah. I give the same explanation in a totally different area. And when we hear it twice in different sugyas, I think it's more misyashav al alev. Tosfos says in Yevomis Tzaddik Omid Beis, the Isser of Kil'ei begodim shatnez, one is over b'shas alavisha, because the Torah says, lo silbash beged shatnez. Mitzvah tzitzis, one is makayim only after the levisha. Ksuscho asher techase bo, is mashma la'achar shehu lavush. B'shas alavisha, you're not makayim mitzvah tzitzis. It is only after you are already dressed and you're wearing that dalat kanfas with tzitzis. Shagasari Simalamed Beis has a kasha on this Tosfos, and he asks, how do we know Esadei Chaloises? What is the source from which we learn this concept of mitzvahs Esadei Chaloises? Kilayim b'tzitzis. That is in Yevomis Daf Dalet. By Kilayim b'tzitzis, by Esadei Chaloises, the Chazal say it must be be'idna. Be'idna de Masaka Lav, Kumakayim mitzvahs Esay. According to Tosfos, it's not the same time. Because the lav of shatnez, you're over b'shas alavisha. You're not makayim mitzvahs till a moment later. La'achar shu lavish. So how could we learn Esadei Chaloises makayim mitzvahs when klayim mitzvahs is not be'idna? Gavaldik kasha. So what does the Shagasariya do when he has a kasha on Tosfos? He has no problems. He rejects Tosfos. That's the Shagasariya. He says Tosfos isn't right because I have a kasha. But we assume that Tosfos is right, and we need to figure out a way to explain Tosfos. And I say the relationship between Levisha and Heyoise Lovish is just like Tkiya and Shmiya, because once again they're inseparable. When you put on a beged, then a split second later, you're wearing that beged, and being lavush is passive. Putting on the beged is active. So it's the same concept. As Tkiya and Shmiya is levishas abeged v'heyoisai lavush, and therefore levishas abeged is defined as the Maisa mitzvah. And Esadei Chaloises is the Maisa, lav dafke the Kiyu. So Kiyu mitzvah tzitzis is a split second later. But Maisa ha-mitzvah shel tzitzis is levishas abeged, because that's all the person does. What comes later is passive. What is the mitzvah that is resting upon him to do? It's levishas ha-tzitzis, and that is defined as a Maisa mitzvah. And therefore, my opinion would be, there's no machlokes Rabbeinu Tam and Rambam defining mitzvah shofar. The machlokes is in a different area. Defining the relationship between the mitzvah and the bracha. What is kavei nusach bracha? The Maisa mitzvah or the essence of the mitzvah? According to the Tur, it is the essence, and that is why we say l'shmoya kol shofar. Rabbeinu Tam and the Sheultas maintain no. What dictates the nusach bracha is the Maisa mitzvah, and therefore we say litkoya b'shofar. Don't ask me, so why doesn't anybody say by tzitzis that the bracha is להיות מעוטף, לא להסעטף. Now, because I think להסעטף includes להיות עטוף. So it's לאו דווקא the מעשה, but מה שאין כן תקיעס שופר and שמיעס כל שופר are definitely two different agdoras and two different formulas. So that's my basic mahalach in this big sugya. And I think it's a big chiddush, and it's dvorim nachonim liyashav divrei harashonim, but it's a totally new approach, and the yesod is a gewaldige yesod, a big chiddush, but I think it's dvorim amas yashva ma'alev. So what is shofar all about? Let's once again ask, tkiya or shmiya? So in today's sheet it became obvious, somewhat of a combination. Different formulas, different words, but tkiya and shmiya together. And I think in Pnimius it's the same, because we find two different reasons in Musa why do we blow shofar. So the Rambam writes, and it's noteworthy, it's not in Hilchos Shofar, but rather in Hilchos Tshuva. Perek Gimel Hilchos Tshuva, the Rambam writes, Afal pi shetkiya shofar b'rosh Hashanah, gzeres hakosov. Remez yesh bo, keloimar, uru yisheni mishenaschem. V'nirdamim ekitzu meta adamaschem. Zichru borechem, chizu b'tshuva. Chipsu b'maseichem. אלה השוכחים מסוימס בהבלי הזמן ושויגים כל שנוסם בהבל וריק אשר לא יויול ולא יציל הביטו לנפשכם היטיבו דרכיכם ומעלליכם ויעזוב כל אחד מכם את דרכו יהורו ומחשבתו אשר לא יטויבו. So the Rambam gives us a musa shmus, and it is if he is standing at the parliament speaking to us. And he uses double language. Uru yishenim mishenaschem v'nerodom makitzu metadamaschem. So as I said, the Rambam doesn't write this in Hilchos Shofar, but rather in Hilchos Tshuva. So it's not a halachic idea, but a musa one. The Ritva takes this very same idea and he explains the halacha. And the Ritva deals with the question of nusach habrocha. What's birchas shofar? And the Ritva asks why, when it comes to Megillah, we say al mikro Megillah, but by shofar we say lishmoya kol shofar. And the Ritva says, very simple, because the mitzvah is kriyas Megillah. But by shofar the mitzvah is not tkiyas shofar, but shmiyas kol shofar, because the shofar is all about tshuva and cheshbon nefesh. So by shofar the mitzvah is hear. And that's why I said at the beginning of the shir, don't hear, listen. It's not enough to hear. You need to listen to the shofar because he's calling out to you. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu, by means of the shofar, is calling out to you. So listen what the shofar has to say. In my shul, there's a Baal Tקיעת, and he blows the shofar every morning, and every morning he tears at my heart. He has such a piercing sound. And it moves my heart, it stirs my heart every morning. So the Ritva says that is why the nusach of Berchas HaShofar is Lishmoya Kol Shofar, because the mitzvah actually is Shmiya. And why is the mitzvah Shmiya? Because it is about Tshuva. But we find another explanation why do we blow shofar, and that's the Gemara Rosh Hashanah Tezayin Amud Aleph. אומר הקדוש ברוך הוא ליסוד, תיקחו לפוני בשופר של האל, ואני אזכור לכם עקדת יצחק, ומעלה אני עליכם כאילו עקדתם את עצמכם. In Sidur HaRashash, he writes that Hidur Tshuva b'shas tkiya shofar is an unbelievable zgula, and it's machapa even on Chai v'Krisos and Mises based. So Sidur HaRashash kol kuloi divrei Kabbalah. But I have a very simple understanding and an interpretation in what he says. Because b'shas tkiya shofar, HaKadosh Baruch Hu promises, Mala ani alechem keilu akadetem es atzmachem. As if each and every one of us is Moiseh Nefesh on the altar, on the Mizbeach, like Yitzchak did. And when a person gives away his neshama to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, he's supposed to say vidui and do tshuva. So the Rashash says, b'shas tkiya shofar, if you have hiru tshuva, it's like giving away your soul, your neshama for HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and that atones for everything, even kolas and misas beis din. So on one hand, we need to do tshuva. On the other hand, the Kodesh Baruch Hu says, Tika lefona b'shofar shalayel, v'ani yizkor lechem ele shel Yitzchak ben Avram. And the Lashon in this Ma'amah Chazal is, Tiku lefonai. You're blowing for me, not for yourself. Blow the horn for me, says the Kodesh Baruch Hu. V'ani yizkor lechem akedes Yitzchak. And that is why we need Tkiya and Shmiya. We blow for our Kodesh Baruch Hu, and we listen for ourselves. We need to listen to do tshuva. But we also blow HaKadosh Baruch Hu, hoping that HaKadosh Baruch Hu will listen. It's not only us that need to hear the shofar. It is HaKadosh Baruch Hu that wants to hear the shofar, because he wants to remember for us. Al manash shetal zechoinchem lefonai letoivo ubemeh b'shofar, because that's Akedes Yitzchak. And that is why, yes, Tkiya and Shmiya, both together, the combination of both, are the shleimus of mitzvah shofar. So I once said a vertel. It's a vertel and not even a vort, but a geschmack a vertel, and I seem to like. Tika b'chodesh shofar b'kesel yom chagenu ki choik li Yisrael hu mishpot lelekayam. So a shofar, a choik, or a mishpot. They are two different concepts. And we all remember from Rashi in different sources, Perush Rashi al Torah, what's the difference between chukim and mishpotim? Chukim are chukim chukakti, gzeres guzarti, v'anachur shlar ha'chayim. Chukim are the mitzvahs we perform without understanding what they're all about. Like shatnez, like Torah Aduma. You don't need to ask questions. You need to do your duty. Mishpotim are the mitzvahs asichlis, which we definitely understand. So we plead with the Kodesh Baruch Hu when we say Rabbeinu Shalom. We're aware that there are two reasonings and two interpretations of Tkiyah Shofar. One is for you and the other is for us. Please, even if the Shofar is a choik li Yisrael, we relate it to this mitzvah as if it's a choik. We don't know why, we just blow. We're just blowing away, and we don't know why. So we ask, please, even if it's a choik li Yisrael, it should still be a mishpot le'elokei yankov. We neglected our reason. We neglected the Rambam, we didn't do tshuva, we're still in a deep slumber. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu, please, for you, it should stay a mishpat. Don't forget your side of the deal. Don't forget what you promised. Tikol afona b'shofar shalayel v'ani yizkor lechem elo shel Yitzchak ben Avram v'mal ani alechem ki'ilu akadetem es atzmechem. So we ask HaKadosh Baruch Hu, even if it's choik li Yisrael, should still be a mishpat le'elokei yankov. I'm not sure that HaKadosh Baruch Hu agrees with this vertel. And I have a feeling that he says, no. You do your share, and I do mine. So when we hear the shofar every day in Elul, and especially Rosh Hashanah, we need to listen to what we hear. Uri yeshenem shinaskem v'nerdom ha'makitzum et ha'adamaschem habitu lenafsho yiseichem v'yitivu d'rochechem v'maralechem v'yazov kol achad mekem es darkei HaRav es machshavtei haloi toiv השוכחים את האמת בהבלי הזמן ושויגים כל שנוסם בהבל וריק שלא יויל ולא יציל. Harsh words, דבורים כדרבוינס, and we need to listen. So let's try to do our best, coming closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, b'tshuva, b'tefillah, b'tzedakah, more chesed and more mitzvahs and more midas toivos, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu should give us rachamei shamayim, and we should be zoicher to ksiv chesima toiva v'sifron shel tzadikim gemurim b'yachad al kol beis Yisrael. And this coming year should be a Shnas Geula v'Yeshua. We should hear b'korov not only kol shofar shel Rosh Hashanah, but also kol shofar shel Moshiach tzedkeinu v'mheiro v'yomeinu.